At this point, you are probably all set to generate your final output. So I'm going to go ahead and close my Hypershade and head back into normal Maya where I have access to the full Arnold render view. Let's make sure that it is rendering through my camera so that I know what I'm seeing. And at this point, because it's bigger, obviously, I should be able to see things in more detail and make sure that everything is actually working the way that I think it is. So here's where you go back and you make any kind of last minute changes that you think you need to make before you hand things in. This is really good. There are a couple of other things that I want to do before I'm ready. First, I will say that if you want to make adjustments like adding depth of field to the scene or adjusting the lighting, please feel free. There is nothing wrong with that at all. I'm not going to do that because there are other things that I want to do. First, I'm going to open up my render view and I'm going to add a couple of AOVs, arbitrary output variables, that I just think are going to be really helpful. And we talked about these way back in the beginning of the class where we talked about getting out your direct and indirect lighting. So in this case, I don't want those things. And in fact, the things that I want are not just here in the default available AOVs. So I'm going to click this button for Add Custom. The first AOV that I want to add is an Ambient Occlusion AOV. So we'll call this that's AMBOCC, Ambient Occlusion. Ambient Occlusion is a method for generating a pass that just gives me the shadows in places where objects meet other objects. So it'll help me darken up the things that should be a little bit darker and maybe brighten some of the things that should be a little brighter. So I'm going to make an AOV named Ambient Occlusion. Maybe because you are students, I will spell that whole thing out. Like that. Now that didn't actually do anything. It didn't generate an AOV for me. It just meant that I now have an ambient occlusion pull down in here. So that's one thing that I want. And I think I'll set this whole one up before we go over any others. So let me close this for a minute. I'll take this ambient occlusion. This little arrow at the end will let me select the AOV node, so I am going to select it, and with it selected I will head over into my attribute editor. This gives me all of the custom AOV controls, and the only one that I really want right now is here under custom AOV where it says shader. I'm going to assign a new shader to this AOV, and that means that when Maya does the render, when Arnold does the render, it will actually create in its head a separate layer that contains this data with a completely different shader, which is kind of amazing. So I clicked the Create Render Node button, the black and white checkbox, and now I'm going to go into Arnold Shader, and I've got options here. I think in this case, I will use the Ambient Occlusion shader, just for now. With that assigned to the brand new AOV, I will go ahead and run that render again. And now if I switch over to the Ambient Occlusion AOV, you can see what it's doing and how it's generating shadows based not on light, but just on object proximity, which is giving me some really nice patterns in my shadows, and it'll help me pronounce some of the little details on the lanterns. Of course, I'm in my perspective shape. I would probably prefer to be in my camera shape, but this is a pretty useful image for me. The Ambient Occlusion shader will allow me to adjust the number of samples, which controls how grainy it is. The spread, which controls how far the shadows go, the fall off, which makes adjustments that are sort of similar to spread, but if you mess around with them, you'll see like spread does the black points and fall off does the white points. I can change the near clip and the far clip, so if I'm getting really weird out there white and black points, this can help me change them. And you can also change white and black. So if you're a modeler and you're just doing a modeling portfolio and you don't really want to light anything, you can throw an ambient occlusion shader onto your models, and then if you think that they would look better in green, you can make them green. Because we're compositing, I'm going to leave this white, but the ambient occlusion shader gives you some really nice options. So that is the first AOV I'm going to make here. So again, over here, I used Add Custom to create a new AOV. I'm making an AOV called Ambient Occlusion. I usually just write Amb Occ. The little pull down here lets me select the AOV. In the AOV node, I'm attaching an ambient occlusion shader to the shader port. So I'll pause here now that you've seen ambient occlusion and how useful it is. Just pause this video. In the next one, I will talk about some other things that you might enjoy with AOVs.